Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you are well wherever in the world you might be joining us from. We are excited to have you for today's Building a NIST 800-171 Control Policy, a step-by-step walkthrough. I am Lisa Remsa. I'm part of the marketing team here at Exostar, and I am having the pleasure of being your humble moderator today. Before we get really into the housekeeping of things, I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to go ahead and get a PolicyPro trial started if you haven't already. We sent out some links for people to do so they can follow our presenters today as they use the PolicyPro tool in building the NIST 800-171 control policy. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, please use the link in the YouTube description. It takes less than 2 minutes to activate a free trial account, and then you'll be able to follow along with our speaker during today's event or afterwards. While we give some folks a moment to do that, just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour, including questions and answers. We have questions that have been submitted prior to the event that we'll be addressing at the end. And in case of an outage, please wait for a minute and simply refresh the page. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand via the Exostar resource library at exostar.com/resources or at the same YouTube link post-event. To speak with one of our industry experts or request a copy of this slide deck, just reach out to us at cmmc-pp@exostar.com or feel free to use the live chat feature or any contact feature at exostar.com. Today's speakers are Sean Fornwalt, who is the Data Protection Officer for ISMS Solutions, and Scott Armstrong, our Senior Director of Risk Applications here at Exostar. Sean will be taking us through the walkthrough, and then Scott will be on hand to answer some CMMC and NIST-specific questions, as well as any risk product questions at the end of the session. And with that, I will go ahead and turn the show over to Sean.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, so once everyone has had a chance to get their free trial set up, you will be receiving an email with your initial credentials to log in. And the way that will work is it does have a 2 to 3 minute delay, but you go in, you'll set up your new account with your physical address of the organization you're working with, as well as resetting your password and adding any users that you would want to have on the account as well. So once we've done that and we're logged into the platform, 1 second here. There we go. So once we're logged into the platform, the first thing that you're going to see is 2 different standards. So we have a module for the NIST 800-171, as well as for the new CMMC standard that came out last year. So what we're going to do is we're going to select one, and we're going to hit the continue button, which will bring us into our platform dashboard. Now, there are a couple of things that I want to point out here that we have on the dashboard an overview of all the policy documents that you have submitted for assessment, as well as some quick links to the Bloomberg government analysis that was added on to the platform just this last weekend. Now, the dashboard itself can be expanded out, and it will give you a very high level of the documents you've had assessed. And when I say assessment, this is for your use in the building and betterment of your policies. This is not something that you would be submitting to the SPRS or Exostar or your primes. This is purely there as an instructional tool to help you improve your documentation going through the process. Now, with the assumption that you have no written policies, and now some people may have smaller policies that cover specific things from remote access to password policies or acceptable use within the employee handbook, but we're going to bring all those things together into one singular document that covers one of the 17 domains in the CMMC. And how we're going to do that is over on our left-hand side. If you pop out this navigation menu, you will see that we have the dashboard where we are currently, our policy builder, our policy assessment, and then our reference library. So these 3 areas are going to be very important when you're building out a policy document. So we're going to click on the policy builder, and the first thing that we're going to do is select which domain we want to write the policy for. So for this example, we're going to select access control, but you'll also see right up here where you can select the level at which you want to build your document. So we're going to select level 3. We're going to click on access control, and let's zoom in a little bit so we can see. And what we have here is what you'll see before all of the domain sections in Policy Builder, where the prepare is some information to go over what this policy will contain and what it will be looking for. The gather is a list of documents that you may already possess within the organization that will help you in answering the compliance questions of the standard itself. This is not an exclusive list. You may have things that are not on this list, but it will get you started in finding the information that you need in order to write an effective policy. And then our consult section is a short list of individuals within your organization or that work with your organization that will be able to answer some of these questions, because this whole process is not purely an IT problem. This is really a whole of business problem. Everyone has to be in agreement of what the policies are going to be to ensure that those policies are followed and adhered to. So once we've gotten a little bit of information from here, we're going to click on the Get Ready. And what we're looking at now is the templates for the policies on PolicyPro. Up here on top, we do have some information. This is mainly for housekeeping and organization. This organization right here is the one that you have registered with the platform, and that will be interspersed throughout the template documentation where appropriate. Put in our department if we're writing it from the IT department, and then we can change our date of when we're issuing this. We're putting in who's approving it and our version number or any other tracking number that your organization uses. So with that taken care of, what we want to move to next is the purpose of the document. And this is fairly self-explanatory, that we want to identify what the policy is actually going to do and why we have this policy. So what the PolicyPro platform provides is some template boilerplate language that you can look at, and then you can adopt this language, you can modify it where it's appropriate, or you can remove it and put in what you feel is more appropriate for your organization. But the general sense of what should be in your purpose is, why are you writing this particular policy, right? And then why we're doing this is because we want to make sure that only authorized individuals can access company assets and company data, and that we are putting in place certain control mechanisms to allow for that. Now, once we've gone and we've adapted this to our organization, and as you can see right here, it's putting in the company name where appropriate throughout the document. And we always want to double check, because we want to make sure that our policies reflect what the organization is doing. So once we've gone in and we've determined what our purpose is, why we're writing the document, we're going to move down to scope. And this is one of the more important parts of a document, because it's identifying what is covered by this policy and who is covered by this policy. Now, again, we've provided some template language that covers pretty much anyone that you're going to interact with and all of the assets that your organization owns. So once we have determined the why we're doing it and the what it's covering and the who it's covering and who has to, be responsible for adhering to the policy, we're going to jump into the controls themselves. So with this, we start off by just listing out every one of the practices in CMMC with the verbiage from the standard, so that you don't have to be jumping back and forth and trying to go between multiple documents to be working with this. We do provide some high-level guidelines about what we're going to be doing in this particular practice, and we've provided some language as well. So what I want to point out here before we jump into the language is that This is about identifying who has access, what processes can act on those users' behalfs, and then what devices you have within your system and how they're authorized. So we will click over here on our little edit button, which is the little white pencil in the black circle. Now, this circular arrow here, I do want to point out, is our reset button. And what this will do is it will take the information that is in the policy builder, and it will revert it back to the original template language, but it's only on a practice by practice level. It will not do the entire domain. And that is something you can just click. You will get a notice. You can choose yes or no, and then it will take you back to the original template language in case you've gotten too far into the weeds and trying to change it yourself. Now, when we go in here, we will open up a text editor box just like we had before for the purpose and scope. And let's zoom in just a little bit so we can see it better. And what we have is the first thing we're putting in the policy is our account creation process, or all of the policy dictating how account creation is taken care of within the organization. Now, as we go through this, you will notice things like we have department manager, we have our IT administrator, and we have our configuration control board. If you don't have those particular roles within your organization, you would want to go through and change them where appropriate so that it is reflecting your organization's structure. So if you don't have a department manager, but you're using, human resources, you would change this to human resources, and then with the abbreviation of HR. So what this is saying is that all accounts will be submitted, or the request for account creation will be submitted by the HR department to IT support using, and then we have our account requesting system. So we can put in here, like we have our IT support. So now what we're doing is we're not using a ticketing system anymore. We're submitting to the IT support email address. So anytime that any department requires a new account to be created, HR will reach out to the IT department via this email, and that's how all requests for new accounts are to be initiated. So now what you want to do is, since we have now established a policy for the company about how we're going to do this, all the people who are involved in this process now need to be educated on it. And that will be true with everything that you put into your policy, because you have to ensure that everybody within the organization is aware of all the policies that they are responsible for adhering to. So in this case, the HR department would be trained. When a new account needs to be created, this is how they do it. And that's how they do it every single time. So we can track it, we know what's going on, and we can make decisions based on that information. Now, next we're talking about what has to be included. Now, this is saying that, originally this was for a ticketing system, so it's no longer all the required fields. We would put all the required information must be completed before the account can be created. And what we want to add here, we want to add in that, required information and we'll do a bulleted list. We'll say name, role, start date, access required, and then etc. So any other pieces of information that you have deemed are appropriate, you would then add into this template. And then, so what we've now done is we've said, this is the way it happens. This is the first part. Here's all the information that you have to have. And now we've determined that. So now we need to determine what different types of accounts we have and how they're handled. So the next piece here is saying that once this request is submitted, the IT team or support team will determine whether to approve or deny a particular account. And the criteria for that should be determined within the company and be in a separate standard operating procedure, so that if it changes over time, it's not affecting the policy itself, it's affecting the procedure of how things are done at the more granular level. So now that we've determined the process of which the information is relayed, what the information required is, and who approves or denies that request, accounts that we're going to have on our information system. So here we're defining that this is everything that relates to a standard account, right? And this is that there will be a defined start date and end date. They will be created within a timely fashion. And as you can see here, we do have a blank. So you can change this to whatever you want. You could say that it's a 2-hour turnaround. You could say it's a 24-hour turnaround. Whatever it is you have in mind for your organization and how it functions is what you would put in your policy. And then next we have with the temporary accounts, we're saying that they will only have access within our existing policies, right? So if we're giving a temporary account, it is bound under all the policies affecting all other accounts that we currently have, and they're not to be given special access that would violate one of our policies. And then down here, we're defining all the different types of accounts that we use. We're saying we have our standard accounts, which are for full and part-time employees, the temporary accounts that we were talking about just a second ago, and any contractors or consultants that were having access our systems from either, one of our devices or from their device via remote access. And then we have our non-standard accounts. And those are your administrative, your system application accounts, or anything with specialized access. And what I do want to clarify here is that we're considering them standard and non-standard for their usage in a normal day of business. So as an administrator on my company system, I have a regular account, my standard full-time employee account that I use for my day-to-day business. And then I have an administrator account that I use for only those tasks that require that level of access. I don't have one account that allows me to do both because I'm still human, the last I was told, so I can make mistakes. And I want to have that separation from any kind of administrative function that I could accidentally do during my day-to-day, not thinking about it. So I always have to put in that additional credential in order to ensure that I'm aware of what I'm doing and the ramifications it can have for the system itself. Now, if you have a different type of account that you use, you should add that in here. If you don't use one of these in particular, you should remove it. Because if it's in your policy and an auditor comes through and says, hey, you have this listed, how is this dealt with? And nobody knows because you don't actually have it. I'm not saying that you'll fail the audit, but it will raise a red flag and cause them to go, maybe their stuff isn't as good as it should be. Let me look harder. So only put in your policies what your company is doing. Otherwise, you'll run into problems that you could have avoided by going through and customizing it specifically to your organization. Now, another aspect of everyone's lives over the last year has been remote work. We had to send our support department to work from home, as many other companies have had to do. So we then had to add additional language into our policies to cover those particular occasions where we had to send people home. And that's what the work from home or bring your own device section of this particular document is. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click the save button, and you will see that the timestamp identified when the latest change was made. Now this is at the GMT time, so you would want to remove about, we'll say 4 or 5 hours, right? So this is just to keep record that if you go back in and you see that something has changed, you can say, wait a second, who was the last person to edit this document? And you do have a record of who that individual was. Now, once we've gone through and we've made all the other applicable changes to the other practices, we'll come down here to the lower right, and there is an upward arrow and a white upward arrow in a black box. We will click on that, and it's going to list out for us everything we have not modified. And this is just to let us know that this is still template language and that we have not changed it, but we can still export it into a Word document. And as you can see, it pops it out right down here in our download bar. And we can click on that. It'll open it up in Word, whichever version you have on your system. And it typically will come up in read only. So we do want to edit that. And now, as we can see, all the information we put up at the top is put into this table. And then as we come down here, we can see all the changes we made. We can make additional changes if necessary. And then we now have our access control policy written out. So what you would do at this point is you would go back through, make sure that everything that you have in here is applicable to your organization and that they're all things that can be feasibly done by the organization. Now, I've written a policy, I've used a template. How do I know if it's any good? And that's where we're going to go back here to the policy assessment. And it expired on me because we do have a 15-minute timeout on the main platform that if you have not had any activity, it will log you out. And that is simply a security feature. So we will sign back in. We will go back into CMMC. And now we're going to go here to the policy assessment. And now we have up here our level. We want to select the level we want to assess it against, which is level 3. And we want to make sure we're in the proper domain. So we upload the document. It'll open up in this file viewer. We will go here to our document that we just downloaded. Now you can upload multiple documents into a set, and the system will aggregate them together and treat them as one document for scoring purposes. So next we're going to hit submit, and now give it just a couple of seconds, and we're going to pop out a score, and this is showing us that it's 73.9%. Not the greatest for an academic score. Luckily, this is not an academic score. We're running on a relevance scale. So 73 is a good number to have. Anything above 50% is considered good, and your score will change as you make adjustments using our Kenny system. And the way that that works is we'll click here on the detailed scorecard. We'll pop out a little bit. We have an overview of the assessment itself, going by the relevance of the document. How close is it to the template document? This one is very similar because I have essentially exported the template language, so it's just saying this requires more customization to be less exactly like the template. And then our word count is here just to say that you're not going to write this particular policy in 500 words. It needs to be longer. Now, if you're using our templates, they will meet this requirement, and you won't have to worry about it as long as you haven't taken too much out. Now, the real important part of this assessment really is the Kenny, or the key elements not included. And the way that our scoring works is that we go through the documents that you've submitted and look for key phrases and terms from the standards themselves for our control-specific Kenny that we're not finding within the document, or the scorer is not finding within the document. And then we'll notify you of that, where in the document it should be found, and then some information on the particular key phrase or term that we're saying is not found in your document. So you would want to read through all this information, and then if you require more, you would click on this link right here, and this will take you to the reference library. Now we have broken this down by individual domains, so we can select the access control, and we can go and find the particular NIST 800 series document that we need to find out how we have to change our policy in order to be more compliant with the standard. And we can click on that. That will pop you out to the NIST.gov site, where you're able to click on the document itself. And then you can read through the specific section by going to the table of contents here. And then selecting, we'll go for network layer security, and it will take you right to that section of the document. And this will be what you need to know in order to make a decision for your company's policy. And then once we've gone through that process, we can also, the reference library can also be found right here on the left-hand nav. And then what we can do is we go back into our document, and it's saying that we need to have emergency accounts. So we have temporary accounts, right? So we can say temporary/emergency. And then we would want to explain a little bit more about what the emergency account is up here, where we were explaining all the different types of accounts. So that's how you go and you use the system in order to assess what your policy documents are, what needs to be added, what concepts you might be missing. And again, the important thing to remember is that this is mainly a concept catch. You may not have the precise words that it's looking for in the document or the exact phrase from the standard, but if you're covering the concept to an adequate level and you feel comfortable that you have covered it to an adequate level, then you can just kind of ignore one or two of them and go on about your day. Now, just for illustrative purposes, I do want to, let's see, we'll go here. And what I'm going to do just to illustrate something is we're going to make a blank document and we're going to save it. And then we're going to throw that blank document up into the system and see what the score is. Now, you will get lower scores if you put in a different domain. You will also get it in if you're missing a large number of the Kennys. Now, this makes sense. We had a 0, but when we look at our Kennys, we now have 235 control specific and 25 general. But if we look back at our other one, we only have 42. So this document template is covering a majority of the concepts required by the standard itself. You just had a couple more that we're not finding. You need to go back and ensure that you're actually covering them in your documentation so that when the time comes for your audit and certification, your documentation's in good order. And then once you're finished with this whole process of writing your documents, assessing them, and then adjusting them, you would move on to the implementation phase, which is where the certification assistant product comes in very handy. So with that, I'm going to hand you back to Lisa, and she's going to help cover some of that.
Bear with me a second as I get back to sharing. All right. So first and foremost, I wanted to let everyone know, sorry, I'm going back and forth here in my slides. There is an exit poll in the description of today's presentation in the YouTube description. We would love it if everyone would take a moment to just complete that for us. It helps us to determine what topics we focus on in the future and make sure that we're providing you with the most valuable content to you in your CMMC and NIST 800-171 journeys. So I do want to go to a few Q&A that we received prior to today's event. Let me take a look at one we got. One question we have is, what is considered, this might be for you, Scott, what is considered multi-factor authentication in a local Windows Server workstation environment? Is a username and password, 2 pieces of information, enough? If not, is there a way to achieve this without third-party software?
All right, good question. And two-factor or multi-factor authentication is definitely a key requirement for systems when you're dealing with CUI, which would apply like in certainly CMMC level 3, but I think even CMMC level 2, they like to have it. Now, the thing is, username and password is not enough. And right now, there's a general consensus that passwords alone for authentication puts people at high risk. The username you could think of actually being your account name. So with the password, that's a second piece of, or that's the first piece of information that you're using to authenticate. Now, when they talk about multi-factor authentication, that's where they say typically it's something that only the user knows, like a password. But if you want a second factor, it's got to be something that only the user has, which could be like a token or like a text message that comes that gives you a special code or something along those lines. Or it also could be something that's something only the user is, like a biometric factor. So sometimes, with your smartphones nowadays, you can have authentication by having it do facial recognition. That's something that only you can do. So when you're talking about two-factor authentication in today's world, it's typically a password plus a second factor from like a text message or something like that that's integrated in. Now, is there a way to achieve it without third-party software? And the answer is yes, but it depends. If you look at Windows, for example, I think in Windows 10 they've added the Windows Hello capability, which enables a second factor to be used for authentication in addition to just the password. If you're talking older versions of Windows, probably not. And that's where, there's third-party products. Exostar does two-factor credentials that get used with all the applications we host, or many of the applications, I should say. But there's other providers that are out there, depending on what software you use that needs that second factor. That's where you've got to look at what's compatible and what's supported from that perspective. Back to you, Lisa.
Great, thank you, Scott. We got a few flavors of this question, but generally the intent is all the same. Once I get my policies in place, what's really the path to certification? And I'm assuming they mean CMMC certification, but what are next steps after documentation is taken care of?
I've got a couple of answers for that one. So when you're going to go through certification, you're going to have a third-party auditor come in and look at things like your policies, procedures that you might have in place, other evidence that shows that you're doing what you say you're doing. So really, the first thing I typically start with is doing a self-assessment. And that self-assessment would be tied to the target level that you're going to be focused on, whether it's CMMC level 1 or CMMC level 3. And if you're dealing with CUI, I always recommend view it through the lens of 171. That's in this Special Pub 800-171, which is the majority of the controls that are also represented in CMMC level 3. And that's, again, dealing with controlled and classified information at that level. So the next steps is really, do your self-assessment, gather all your evidence, typically in one place, and manage it so that you've got, whether it's your policies, procedures, other documentation and proof that shows you're doing what you say you're doing. And be critical of yourself when you do that self-assessment, because you might find gaps or things that you need to remediate. And that's where you put in what's called a plan of action and milestone. It's really a task that says, hey, let's say you need endpoint security software, antivirus. You say, I need to implement this by X date. You've got a resource that you assign it to somebody, you put a deadline on it. And that's something you can track to completion. Now for CMMC certification, you can't have any open POAMs, the plan of actions and milestones. They all have to be implemented, so to speak. For 171 compliance, they give you wiggle room, but it's got to be realistic. If you say, I'm going to implement something 5 years from now and I think I'm all good, if you go through an audit with that, you won't, it won't be a positive result. So it's really got to be a near-term implementation plan. And with the risks around all this right now, I always recommend, as you go through that self-assessment, if you find weak areas or areas where you don't have the internal skill sets or knowledge, that's where you should be looking for some additional third-party support, whether it's a consultant or somebody else to help do that rigorous self-assessment and to help do remediations to help prepare you for the actual third-party certification process.
To dovetail off that a bit, Scott, we did have a few questions, and I know we get these in pretty regularly as to is CUI/CDI always marked? And is there a definition of what CUI is specifically? And I just wanted to let the audience know, we'll put this in the YouTube description, but there is a website, dodcui.mil, that you can go to. MIL is in M as in Mike, I as in Igloo, L as in Lima. That is the government website that goes through all the specifics of CUI and what could be considered CUI and where you might find denotation of that. So we'll go ahead and put that in the YouTube description for all of today's attendees. Another question that we got, and we do see this one often as well, when a company only provides COTS products and does not handle any secret, classified, or sensitive information, is the company required to implement NIST 800-171 or CMMC policies and processes?
Well, I'm going to jump back up to the CUI one for a second there, then I'm going to move on to your next question. On the question, is CUI always marked? The answer is no, and there's a reason for that. Sometimes it's going to be marked and you'll see it when you receive it, but the reality is CUI can be something that you create as well. And then you may not have it marked because you're creating it. You should be marking it as you share it with others, but that's where the onus is really on the person managing it, whether you're creating it, receiving it, et cetera, that if it's not marked, you still treat it appropriately. And I think the government will get more rigorous over that over the next period of time because they're still in a period of transition. Now on the COTS products, if you don't handle any secret, classified, or sensitive information, then you should be, based upon current guidance, not required to be going through the CMMC process. As far as 171, you shouldn't be required to do that. However, you better look at your contracts because the DoD typically puts it in many of the contracts anyway, and it could apply to you if you end up with CUI. Now, 171 and CMMC does not relate to secret, classified, or sensitive information. It's really focused on the controlled unclassified information. When you get into the secret and classified systems, that's a whole nother set of standards separate from 171 and CMMC. The one thing I will mention, I have found some COTS providers that also have professional services employees that do end up having clearances and go on site and do those sorts of activities with the government, where you might think that 171 may or may not apply to you. However, if you have a facility clearance and receiving some of the threat intelligence information from the DoD, typically it's going to be marked CUI, and I have found COTS vendors that have had to deal with 171 and CMMC because they're in receipt of CUI, even though they don't have it tied directly to their COTS business, so to speak. So that's where just do a double check, especially if you got cleared employees. Check with your what's called your FSO, your facility security officer, and they would know from their perspective if there's any additional CUI that they're actually handling and what those implications would be for your firm.
Great, thanks, Scott. This might a lot of our attendees today might relate to this. I'm looking into the process of self-assessment, and it seems overwhelming to find out even where to start. There seems to be no end of sights with vendors willing to contract with us, but there must be ways of handling this using our internal skill set along with our IT vendor to comply with the standards. So the question is there an easy and streamlined way to proceed and make sure we are doing all we need to do in order to be compliant with both CMMC and 800-171?
Yes, there's definitely things to help you there. And, there's a lot of resources out there, whether it's documents from the government, but that's where we also have a companion application that complements PolicyPro that's called Certification Assistant. It enables you to do your not only your self-assessment, but also the evidence collection and centralized management of all the data so that you can be ready for an audit, but it gives you the ability to go through in a step-by-step process of not only collecting the data, but doing everything you need to do to generate a system security plan. Now, if you're going to be going through the CMMC process or even 171 for an audit, you need to have a system security plan plus any POAMs that are need to be managed or remediated for 171 available and complete. So this particular solution gives you that guided tour on how to build up all the information you need for the system security plan, but it also does things like your DoD assessment scoring methodology, which is a new requirement that the DoD has, so that if you're going to be getting a prime contract or any subcontracts that it contains CUI, then you're going to have your own 171 score based upon your self-assessment input into a government database called SPRS. So that's where, in that particular solution, we give the ability to toggle between two views of either 171 or CMMC up to level 3 in our standard edition. And that way, depending on how you're preparing, whether it's for a contract with a CMMC level 3 or just needing to get your baseline done for 171 and getting your house in order there, we give you the ability to walk through it both ways, and it's just cross-mapped. And it also provides easy access into PolicyPro as well. So from your evidence that you need, if you need to be working with your policies to continue improving them and remediating them, you can do that all essentially as well.
Perfect. That rolls right into our next question, which is actually about submitting your self-assessment. How does our company submit our self-assessment via SPRS? We completed an internal self-assessment. Understand we were supposed to submit this by the end of 2020, but we're a bit confused onto the how and where.
So the Supplier Performance Risk System, or the lovely acronym SPRS, it is a government system. It is now hosted by DISA. There's two easy ways to find it. You can either go to Google and just Google SPRS DISA, and it'll take you to a URL that is under disa.mil, and you'll be able to quickly find it there. But on the My Exostar site, if you go to that myexostar.com and under the little search window, just search for SPRS and hit search, it'll take you to a resource area of our website that we have for our Partner Information Manager. That's one of our risk applications that people do, suppliers do 171 self-attestations. It's got resources to include hot links that take you directly to the SPRS website, their FAQ, and I believe their user guide. It's a little bit complex of a system because you've got to have an account that's created and managed by another system called PIEE. And there's links to this from the SPRS system and guidance there. And then you actually input your summary score, DoD assessment score, and a few other things like your cage codes into the SPRS system. Now, the one thing I'll mention is you do have to have cage codes, and I believe be in the sam.gov database, which is another government database, and this is also explained at the SPRS website. So you've got a couple moving pieces there. And what I would say is, go to the SPRS website. You can get there, bookmark a few of these pages because it's not entirely intuitive from the people I've spoken to that have gone through it, but it is, as you slog through it, you can do that. And if you've got additional questions about that, feel free to email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, and we can provide you some direct links as well.
Perfect. And yes, we are happy to provide all of that educational resource information to anyone that requests it. And this kind of the question, when do we expect contracts to begin requiring CMMC certification? I know it's a 5-year rollout. Do we know which contracts will have that requirement this year or next?
Great question. So we know that they've announced in December in a press release on the defense.gov website, they announced 7 contracts that they've committed to having CMMC in. The U.S. Navy has done 3 contracts. One is for the Integrated Common Processor. One's for the FA-18 full mod of SBAR and shutoff valve. That's more info than what I need. And then there's also a lead yard services contract. The Air Force is 3. Mobility Air Force Tactical Data Links, consolidated broadband global area network follow-on, and an Azure cloud solution. So that's Microsoft Azure cloud solution. And then the 7th contract is known now is announced by the Missile Defense Agency. That's a technical advisory and assistance contract. Now, if you want to find the press release, it'll be on defense.gov, but you could just Google, CMMC contracts, and you'll probably find it in the top 3 or 4 links from Google. They have said they're going to be doing 15 contracts this year. With the new administration coming in, they've pressed a pause button to be able to have the new administration say which contracts they're going to be. I know the Army and other agencies have already nominated additional contracts, but to my knowledge, it's not been announced yet by DoD which additional contracts will be include CMMC. Now, the other comment that I will mention is there's quite a few government, what's called a GWAC, government-wide acquisition vehicles, or contracts that are including the CMMC language for people that are going to be competing on them. However, it's going to be at the task order level where you compete and you'll need your certification. So that's where, it's starting to leak out into contract vehicles now that people are competing on. However, that's where for the GWACs, you don't need to have your certification yet, but at the task order level, going into next year, you certainly will. So I expect RFIs and RFPs to be out this year. That'll then probably be, awarded over late summer, September timeframe, and then, continuing rolling through next year in increasing numbers.
Great. Well, that was our last question for today, but I would want to take a moment to let everyone know that is attending today, especially those that have opted into the PolicyPro trial. We do have weekly workshops related to policy education, related to using PolicyPro. We also have monthly workshops about the other product that Scott mentioned, Certification Assistant, where we also step through that product. We also offer a free trial for that you are more than welcome to opt into, and we're happy to show you how that can save you some time. The PolicyPro trial specific to this event, please feel free to opt into that at any time. You could use it after this event when you're rewatching the webinar if you want to follow along. We highly recommend it. It's always helpful to have hands on keyboard. Again, we have the exit poll at the end. So in the description link, if you would be so kind as to fill it out to let us know what you thought about today, what you'd like to hear of more in the future. We would really appreciate it. Our goal is to keep the DIB community as informed as possible, especially with NIST 800-171 and CMMC evolving every day. So we're in this with you and we're here to help. If you need anything, you have any questions, want additional information, please give us a shout out at cmmc-pp@exostar.com or cmmc-team@exostar.com. And of course, there's live chat on the website for you to engage with us. So thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our next event. We're off the air.
How do we really know we're off the air?
Yeah, no, we're off the air.